dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray.
Woe, tidings of comfort and joy.
Comfort and joy. Tidings of comfort and joy.
Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and for this holiday season, I got a special video for you. I was debating on what exactly to do again for this year. I considered it both a Meta Knight fight list or a video on the many treasures you find in the Great Cave Offensive. But as I already have 2 Kirby video series that I'm doing at the moment, I was worried about getting burnt out. So again, I was a bit stumped. But then I encountered something while researching for my extinct invertebrate iceberg video, that being amber, and that my dear grandmother had gotten a sort of necklace of one for one Christmas. So I thought, why not make a video on amber, but not just any amber? No, instead, this time we will be discussing a subject that is a source of much controversy and lots of misinformation that I feel needs to be addressed in a proper manner that others simply haven't. After all, there is no greater gift than knowledge. But before we get to that, though, I think it is for the best that we explain what exactly amber is. Alright, so what exactly is amber? Well, amber is a term that originates from the Middle Persian word ambar, which in turn was translated by the Arabic into amber, then into Middle Latin as ambar, then into Middle French as ambre, until it entered into English as well, amber. At the time, it didn't refer to the gemstone. Instead, it referred to the waxy substance now called ambergris. Amber is produced in the bile duct of sperm whales as a way to deal with sharp squid beaks from the giant squids they eat. It sounds disgusting, but used to be highly prized by the perfume industry until a ban on whaling and the invention of synthetic stuff led to it generally declining in usage, and in turn became little more than a curiosity. The gemstone, more commonly referred to as amber, wasn't really referred to as such until the 13th century. At the time, it was only called amber vejon or yellow amber. It is believed that due to both amber and ambergris being found on the beach, the terms became associated, and in the end, as ambergris declined in use, it was the gemstone that took over the term amber was referring to. But that's just a term. What about the substance itself? Well, amber is basically fossilized tree sap or resin. Usually yellow, though some impurities can turn it a different color. For example, pyrites can turn it blue or green, as seen in some deposits from the Dominican Republic, or oxidized iron can turn some red. However, what is far more interesting than its makeup or color is that it is a window to animals that otherwise are far too small or delicate to be preserved otherwise. In terms of age, the oldest amber dates to the late Carboniferous, or as I prefer to call it, the Pennsylvanian stage. It is, however, very rare, and as of yet, we've not really found any large animals trapped in that stuff, but it's so interesting as we don't quite know what made it, as chemically it's similar to flowering plants, but predates them by about 190 million years ago. So neat, but still rather limited in how useful it is. Who knows, maybe somebody will find more of it and they'll find some animal in it. If they do, it'll truly be an ancient creature. From there, we see a few amber specimens from the Triassic and Jurassic, but again, it's so limited in terms of numbers, and again, doesn't really contain much that's notable. Most of the more famous amber deposits of the Baltic and Dominican date far more recently to the Eocene and Miocene. Thus, while more common, for the most part, the stuff that gets stuck in there consists of modern genera or those closely related to them. Still amazing and beautiful, but not really all that useful in helping us understand invertebrate evolution. However, there is one deposit of amber that shines above all others due to its age and numbers. That is the Burmese Amber. Let us now discuss the geological context of what exactly is Burmese Amber and what's so special about it in the first place. Alright, so the Burmese amber is a bit of a misnomer, as it's found in the country of Myanmar, which was called Burma prior to 1989. This more political stuff I will discuss later, but for now let us ignore this human-centric term and instead look at the broader ecological and temporal context. The amber, thanks to surrounding fossils like Mortonoceros and lead uranium dating methods, has been determined to date to around the time of about 100.5 million years ago, which is the boundary between the Albian stage, aka the end of the early Cretaceous, and the Cenomanian stage, aka the start of the late Cretaceous. During this time, Myanmar would have been a island in the now gone ocean known as the Tethys Ocean. It would have been a tropical forest, as can be told by the many arthropods found there. Further evidence for this can be found in the fact that the amber itself comes from the trees of the family Arancacea, which is today limited to 41 species in 3 genera, mostly found in the tropics of New Caledonia, Australia, New Zealand, and Malaysia. It was also found that certain regions of this formation took place in a shallow marine lagoon. This can be told by the fact that we have found numerous gastropod shells, such as those in the genus Mathilda, as well as numerous marine isopods, as well as a dead juvenile ammonite of the genus Bihamarites, which is a subgenus of the much larger genus Pozosia, which indicate that there definitely would have been at least some areas where the trees would have sort of had branches that go over this area. Though also, it seems there would have been much more freshwater deposits, as can be told by freshwater bivalves and stuff such as those of the genus Paleolingopholis. It is believed that there would have also been forest fires, as based on the presence of burned plants and fire-adapted animals like the genus Aracophagia, Plioburmensis, and Eophylacia physincancella, both of which are similar to other plants in that they have adaptations to surviving set environments. So yeah, overall, the environmental context of the Burmese amber would have kind of looked like the modern day tropical peat swamps of Borneo, but with dinosaurs and pterosaurs instead of, mammals. But now let us finally get into what is perhaps the most important aspect about this deposit, and that is what you're most likely interested in, that being the biota. So you got quite a bit of stuff that normally is not found preserved. This includes Stenomyces, a slime mold, amoebas, protists, and bacteria, and a shocking level of diversity such as the genus Paleoricketes. You also have fungi such as Enteroprezites, which is the oldest of the order Hypocreales to be found, and one of only 2 found, period. There was Paleoagrales Ahaliquentis, the second oldest member of the order Agonicales. There you have Paleocambrosa, one of the first examples of fungi symbiosis with beetles in the fossil record. You also had Paleogangster, an extinct relative of the modern boletes, often consumed by people today, as well as total fungal mysteries like Sphenophilia ovarala. This is really a precious look at fungi, which are otherwise rarely preserved in the fossil record. Going to the plants, you got, in addition to other stuff I mentioned previously, various types of soft mosses like Caliminprites, club mosses like Selenogalella, liverworts like the genus Frulania, tree ferns like Thycepteris crotacea, true ferns like Cystodium sobrinfroides. Flowering plants were also very diverse, with representatives of various orders. Cornels, the order that includes such modern plants as dogwoods and hydrangeas, is represented by Eopygia burmanensis. The order Laurels, which includes bay laurels, cinnamon, and avocado, are represented by such genera as Jamesrosia burmanensis and Paleothela. Liliacales, which are the order that includes lilies, are represented by one specimen, Miraflores burmites. The order Nymphales, better known as water lilies, are represented by pollen of the genus Praenifia, Apollinates Cricomentaspis. You have a good number of Oxyalides, which are the group that includes modern-day Australian Alhorny pitcher plants, represented by such genera as Tropicogyme. The Poales are the order that includes modern-day grass and bromeliads. They're also rather rare back in the Cretaceous compared to today and are represented by only two species in the genus Spraganiumensis. The Rosales are also represented by two species of the genus Eopycitea. The group today includes, true to its name, roses and such things. Last but not least, we got a bunch of basil flowering plants that don't quite fit in any modern group, and likely due to being oddities and dead ends that never really flowered, get it, into successful groups, like Leginganthus revoluta. While all very useful for establishing the environment that the Burmese Amber was made up, no doubt you're kind of sick of the wait, as you know, plants to many people aren't that very interesting. So now let us discuss the stars of the Burmese Amber, the animals. Let us start with the small stuff, both physically and in terms of diversity. We got a single echinoderm, Isocrinus tegeri, which was a member of the order Isocrinata, which were a crinoid or sea lily that likely got trapped as debris that washed ashore and fell into some amber. It still has relatives today, though they have mostly abandoned the shallows as a result of the Mesozoic marine revolution that was underway around this time. You also had the velvet worm Cretacoperipatus burmiticus, which was one of only two fossil velvet worms in existence, the other being the Pennsylvanian-aged Antennapetus from France. But unlike that one, it is exquisitely well preserved to the point that it has been assigned to the family Peripatidae. This discovery helped to solve a long-standing problem for the group. As you see, velvet worms today are only located in South America, Australia, New Guinea, and South Africa, with one species, however, being in South Asia. Long it was assumed that they rafted over from Gondwana via the drifting of India northwards, but now it seems, thanks to this discovery, that they may have actually spread earlier through Europe, back when conditions were better, which is very interesting. Continuing with the wormy thing, she got 8 nematodes from 4 orders, one of which is Proheterohabitus burmanensis. It is believed to have potentially been a parasitic of certain beetles at the time. There was also one nematomorpha, Cretacortis burmitites, Better known as Gordian worms, they're sort of like nematodes and live as parasites, especially of mantises, but they are far longer. And while ancient, this genus looks nearly identical to modern forms, showing the ancientness of this group. You also have many mollusks. Aside from the ammonite and bivalves I mentioned before, there were around 24 land snail species found. Let us now talk about vertebrates, which often get all the focus and a lot of other coverage that will become relevant later, but I think it needs to be stressed that they are in fact the minority, with only 11 described genera. Starting with the amphibians, we have the frog Electrorana limoe, known from 4 specimens that were provided by M.S. Moley, who originally brought them specimens from a dealer and gave them over for study. In life, it was a 0.79-inch long frog, though given that they were juveniles, they might have gotten bigger, and their position in the frog group is disputed, but they are thought to lie outside the Neobacteria, which is the group that includes 96% or so of all frogs alive today. The second amphibian is far more interesting. Yakasha dereti was originally thought to be a stem chameleon, but was revealed to be a member of the Allocaudata, which are a group of superficially salamander-like animals, but are actually the sister group to all living amphibians, and had bony fish-like scales developing from their back and grew up without any metamorphosis. Interestingly, they actually survived until quite recently, lasting until the beginning of the Pleistocene in Europe. Moving on from the amphibians, the remaining vertebrates were reptiles. Yes, birds are reptiles. Starting with the squamates, aka lizards and snakes, we got Xiophis myanmarensis, which was an infant snake whose position is still uncertain. As for lizards, we have the oldest gecko known, that being Cretaceous burmae, one of the oldest skinks known, that being Electrosinceres zedi, one of the oldest agamid lizards, Protodraco mondaki, as well as some basal forms like Barlocherosaurus, which may be a stem anguimorph, and the oddly bird-headed lizard Octulodentavis. Keep that one in mind as it'll return later. Speaking of birds, the last two vertebrates are Eantiornithians, which are distinguished from modern birds by their differing articulation in their shoulder bones. That is sort of the opposite of those seen in living birds. There are 2 genera, Electroornis and Forticavis. Impressive that they were found, for they are some of the largest animals ever found in amber, being birds. But while the vertebrates may be neat, they are nothing compared to the sheer treasure trove of true diversity that can be found in the arthropoda, who get their names from their jointed exoskeleton. All 4 big groups are represented here. Let us start with the smallest of the 4, the crustaceans. Yeah, technically insects are crustaceans, but for the sake of saving time and making things easier, I'm not going to bunch them together, as it's beyond the scope of this video, and frankly, crustaceans works better than non-hexapodal crustaceans, so yeah. Back on topic, crustaceans are represented by 2 classes, Malacostraca and Ostracoda. Starting with the smaller of the 2, the Ostracoda are better known as seed shrimp for their bivalve shells and are represented by 4 genera, such as Miamocrypsis and Electrocypria. Far more diverse are the Malacostracia, which basically contains all crustaceans you probably know, like crabs, lobsters, crayfish, and such things. There are 3 orders represented in Burmese Amber, Tanadaxia, Decapoda, and Isopoda. Starting with the most obscure, we got the Tanaidacia, often called Tanaids. They are fairly minor shrimp-like creatures that still live today in the bottom sediments of marine and freshwater habitats. Those from the amber are said to be very similar to the modern ones. Indeed, the species Tanadorium cachiensis is believed to have helped open up a gap that had been formerly unknown for the group. Isopods, better known as roly-polies or pillbugs, are represented in Burmese amber by 5 species. Most notable of these include Paleoarmadillar, Microsoma, and Myanmariscus. Some could roll up in life, but others were just stuck being flat. But most spectacular of the crustaceans are the 2 decapods found in the Burmese amber. Xiophreneus electrinurus was a prawn of the family Pholadidae, but more spectacular was the crab Cretaceous athenata, which is notable for being an early colonization into freshwater, which would go on to happen convergently many times in the future. Now going on to the myriapods, which are the group that contains millipede centipedes as well as their more obscure relatives. Starting with the more obscure one, there is the very obscure group known as the symphalans, often called pseudocentipedes, and they're represented by 1 taxa found in the Burmese amber, Stymphala patrick-murale. The Celopoda, better known as the centipedes, have 2 representatives, Cachinphilus, a soil centipede, and Lithodendra anajaphenius, which was a more standard centipede. But without question, millipedes are the most diverse of the ones found in the Burmese amber, with 16 species, most of which belong to living groups, but most notable is the genus Burmapetulum in expectum, which is a representative of an entirely new suborder of millipedes only known from Burmese amber, which is something we haven't really discovered in quite some time. Moving on to the spookiest of the arthropods, the arachnids are the second most diverse group from the deposit. You got mites like Imnesmoris chubaki, which is the largest mite ever recorded, reaching a massive 0.31 inches long. There are, of course, my beloved harvestmen, the Apuleones, represented by 19 species, mostly of the Cryptophthalmi, or mite harvestman, and laniators, which are better known as the armored harvestman suborder. I have an entire video of these guys that are native to my home state if you'd like to learn more. There's around 18 tick species, the most notable one of which include Dinocraton, which is believed to be related to the most basal of all ticks that live today in southern Africa, and Chimaria fossis, an important missing link that has traits of both major families of modern ticks, Isogdidae, the hard ticks, and Argaspidae, the soft ticks. We also got the oldest fossils of the palpigrade order, Electrocanemia, which, are a rather obscure group that are also called micro-whip scorpions that still persist today. You also have the oldest representatives of the order Schizomida, better known as the short-tailed whip scorpions, or sprickets, with 8 species. This group's modern representatives are some of the least researched in the world, so this helped shine a light on their origins. The infamous solifuges, also called camel spiders or wind scorpions, even though they're not really either, are represented by a single species, Cushing Ellingbergi. Speaking of scorpions, there are 50 species, some of which, like Beta Burmeskirth looked like a modern form. There are also 11 species of pseudo-scorpions, which are these little dudes that hitch rides on crane flies to spread. The most notable one being Procheridium judsoni. We then see that there are 4 species of Amblyopygi, more well known as tailless whip scorpions or whip spiders. They use their first pair of legs as antennae, and the most notable of these in the Burmese amber is Burmacaron dunlopi. Then there are 3 species of Uropygi, better known as whip scorpions or vinegaroons, who can spray vinegar-smelling liquids from their tails, the most notable one here being Mesothelophones. Perhaps the most obscure group of arachnids alive today are the Reniculea, also called the hooded tick spiders. They are represented by 7 or so species, which are very notable for filling a gap in this group, which we previously only knew from the Pennsylvanian. The most notable of these is Primocluevus pugio. Then, of course, we come to the most famous of all arachnids, the Araneae, or spiders. There are around 384 or so species, many of which come from clades alive today in their very basal forms. Of particular note is the family Lygonomegapidae, a family of spiders known from the Cretaceous that are represented here by 5 species. Of Odontomegopsis titan is the most well-known of these, and they would have filled a niche filled today by wolf spiders. But really, the most famous arachnid of the Burmese amber has to be Chimaeroarachne, which, true to the name, are a sister group to all living spiders and are distinct due to possessing a long, whip-like tail. Originally thought to be a late-surviving Uraniid, further research showed that they possessed spinnerets, so they are technically more related to true spiders than they are to that group, and are remarkable for showing that stem spiders persisted for far longer than we expected. And frankly, it probably deserves more research put into it. With that, we come to the last group of animals found in the Burmese amber, the hexapoda, which outnumber everything else. So strap in, folks. We're not even close to being done. First, you got the springtails, which are the sister group to true insects. All 3 orders of them are represented in the amber. Podomorpha, the rarest, are only represented by the species Prototontella minicornis. The Symphalian, more often called the globular springtails, are represented by 4 species, and the most diverse of the 3 orders, the Entomyomorpha, are represented by 9 species, all of which look fairly similar to modern-day forms and lived as humble omnivores in the shadows of insects. Speaking of them, let us dive into them now, starting with the most basal of the true insects. Starting with the Zygentoma, better known as the silverfish, they are the most primitive of all insects still alive today, originating in the Devonian and are represented by 3 species, the most notable of which is Cratelopisma cachenicum, which looks very similar to some that are alive today. Next we have the Archaeognatha, more often called the jumping bristletails. They are a bit more diverse with 6 species, the most notable of which is Eumetrodelanus abundus, which helped to show how the modern families diverged much earlier than the Cretaceous, possibly originating in Gondwana. Then we come to the Paleoptera, which are the first insects to have wings, though unlike later forms, they can't fold them over their bodies. First, we have the Ephemeroptera, better known as the mayflies. There are 8 species known from Burmese amber, the most notable being Vetuformosa bucklei, and they would have lived very short lives true to their name. Then we have the Odontopleura, better known as the dragonflies or damselflies. There are 38 known from the Burmese amber, such as the dragonfly Burma Lica imperfecta and the damselfly Burmongrion marjornmatoka. But perhaps the most notable is the species Burmaphyllabia rafei, which is part of the family Epiobidae, which are neither dragonflies or damselflies, but rather something in between that diverged before the split between the two, and are called by some damsel dragonflies. I prefer the name dragon damsels, but anyway, today these guys are limited to 3 species from mountain streams of Japan, India, northern Vietnam, and northeast China. This shows they were once far more diverse in the past. Now let's go on to the insects that can fold their wings over their bodies. Starting with the most basal grouping, there is the clade Paralida, represented by 5 orders, as in the Burmese amber. First are the Dermoptera, better known as the earwigs. They are represented by 15 species. The notable ones included Astroprolabius elthrosomata and Thyloplatys mechiomocharis. Less familiar is the order Embryoptera, more often called the web spinners due to the fact they can use their forelimbs to produce silken homes where they live and eat all sorts of things. There are around 7 species known from Burmese amber. The most notable is Oreoganthuba olivia. Even more obscure, we have the order Grylobelatoidea, which consists of the ice crawlers of the mountains of the northern hemisphere. We got a single species from the Burmese amber, Civalitoides chenai, showing that the group was far more diverse in the past. Then we got the Plasmatoidea, which are better known as the stick insects or leaf insects. There are a total of 11 species known from the Burmese amber, of which notable ones include Tumefaciterops prolongates and Elasponaspia stictum. Last but not least, we got the Plecoptera, better known as the stoneflies. There are 24 or so species known from the Burmese amber. Notable ones included Pingius perla yangzhuanensis and Petroperta mcjaggeri, which, yes, is named after Mick Jagger. Then we got the Paraneoptera, a superorder that includes many familiar insects. First to the Hemiptera, better known as the true bugs, and they are quite diverse, with a total of around 175 species or so known from the Burmese amber, many of which, like Silologris and Frerer, would have looked like living plant hoppers. Other more notable ones included Himpareas, which was a representative of Tegitogositidae, also called hairy cicadas, which are today limited only to Tasmania and southern Australia, meaning that they used to be much more common in the past. Even more obscure is Gaxovia calciundata, a member of the suborder Corinchia, also known as the moss bugs. These are a very ancient group that dates back to the early Permian and are today restricted to the nothofagus trees of Australia, New Zealand, New Caledonia, and South America. Continuing on, we got the Thypsnoptera, more well known as thrips, which are sadly oftentimes pests on gardens. There are 11 species delicately preserved in the Burmese amber. The most notable of this is the genus Rothrips, which has 4 species, all very similar to ones around today. Then there are the Zoropterans, also called angel insects due to their fragile angel-like wings. There are 12 species known from the Burmese amber. The most interesting of these is Zorotyphus hirsuta. Next we have the Socodia, better known as lice. Before you start itching, don't worry, all these guys known from the Burmese amber, around 22 species, were free-living and would have likely fed on plants. Indeed, many lice, such as Burmocospium supracrium, look much like modern bark lice and are generally considered to be the most basal of the group. But I've also saved the best for last, the Permososcida, an entirely extinct order of insects. These guys emerged in the Muscovian stage of the Pennsylvanian, discovered in 1926 by Robert Ronan Gentili, and it was not until the Burmese amber found preserving them in 3 dimensions that we were really able to establish where exactly they fit. And it turns out they are a sister group to the clade that includes thrips and true bugs. Some forms were pollinators. The most well-preserved of the 4 species known from Burmese amber is Socorynchia burmetica, and they seem to have gone extinct shortly afterwards, likely due to the flora overturn causing the adaptation of flowering plants and, of course, new competition from other insect groups. Next, we come to the clade Dictycoptera, which includes mantises, termites, and cockroaches. Starting with the less diverse of the 2 orders, the Mantodia, which, if it's not obvious, include mantises, are represented by 4 species of the genus Burmantis, which are neat, but nothing compared to the diversity found in the order Blytoidea, with a total of 115 or so species. Of course, you got regular roaches like Rurotia exploratoria, gladiator. There are also many termites like the species Costotermes multis. Termites, by the way, are highly modified cockroaches that you might not know about that fact. They weren't the only ones, however. There were also manipulator. No, not that one. The insect. It was a cockroach that sort of resembled a mantis, but was actually completely unrelated and was mostly a peaceful pollinator. Though that wouldn't stop it, of course, from occasionally eating on smaller things. There was also the Alienopterids, a family of highly unusual stem group Dictyopterans, which had alien-like heads, best represented by the genus Aethocarius. There was also the superficially beetle-like Olorarids, which had hardened wing coverings, best represented in the Burmese Amber by Ineropraelia nigra. Now let's go into the clade Coleopterida, which is divided into two orders. The more obscure and less diverse of the two is the Strepsiptera, which are more commonly known as the twisted-wing insects, though, let's be honest, they don't really have common names, as nobody really knows about them outside of specialists, which live as parasites of other insects like bees or leafhoppers. There are only 4 found in the Burmese Amber. The most notable is Heterobathwalia hackenporesis. But the other order, the Coleoptera, are, way more famous and need no introduction, for they are the beetles, the most diverse insect group in our present day, and in the Burmese Amber they are similarly diverse with around 552 or so species divided into 4 suborders. Now, I can't possibly go into all the families, let alone all the genera, but to show some notable ones from each of the suborders, we have stem whirligig beetles like Chimero gyrus gigalia of the Adelphaga suborder. The Archostomata suborder, the oldest of the 4, are represented in the Burmese Amber by such forms as Burkahilius lindae. Then you have representatives of more recent groups like weevils, such as the genus Acanthopygius, or rove beetles, such as Cretaceous richentoi. Going on from the beetles, we have the Neuropterida superorder, who are united by features of the wings that generally resemble nets. They are divided among 3 orders. Starting with the least numerous, we have the Megaloptera, more famously known as the alder flies, fish flies, Dobson flies, or Helgamites. They are represented by a single species, Haplocedolus lui. Next, we have Raphidioptera, more well known as snakeflies for their body shape, are represented by 15 species such as Rhinocoporida burmana and Nanoramphidae Surotilus lemprica. These fossils are notable because today the group is restricted to temperate conifer forests of Eurasia and North America, but this shows that they were once far more common in the earth. But the most diverse order in both the Burmese Amber and in modern times of the Neuropterida is Neuroptera, or net-winged insects, which is what they're usually called, with 123 or so species known from the Burmese Amber, representing various families that, of course, are super diverse. There are lacewings such as Parabaxtoria macarina. There's antlions such as Mesophinx ungulates, dusty wings like Paleocaris azari. There are also mantis flies such as the genus Acanthosmatispa, but the most notable members of this group are 2 entirely extinct families. First are the Calligrammatidae, often called the Mesozoic butterflies due to filling a similar niche to butterflies and having similar wings. They lived during the Jurassic and early Cretaceous, and unlike others in the group, were peaceful pollinators, pollinating the now extinct Benetales and Pterodactylae. Second and more obscure of the families is the Dipteromastapidae, which are unique for only having a single set of fly-like wings and would have lived like modern robber flies do. Also notable is an unusual insect larva known as Partinciferus, with a highly unusual modified beak-like mouthpart that is not normally seen in larval insects at all, and is believed to be a baby lacewing of some type. Next, we go to the Hymenoptera, which includes the famous honeybees. There are a total of around 409 species or so, second only to the beetles in terms of number, and as such I cannot possibly cover them all, but I will note a few notable ones. First, we got some sawflies, which are a group of basal hymenopterans not closely related to other more derived forms. They have an entire extinct lineage known from the Burmese Amber, represented by the species Strichlea, which showed the richness of the group that once existed in this time. And indeed, it's believed that this specific lineage was already a relic in the Cretaceous, originating far earlier in time. The more derived groups were also thriving. While bees were not present, as they only emerged 70 million years in the later Cretaceous, ants absolutely thrived, with two entirely extinct subfamilies. First, there are the Symphenomenae, with 8 genera that mostly resembled modern ants, and the far more interesting Haedomycenae, better known as the hell ants, which had truly demonic heads and are believed to have used them in hunting. Wasps are also very diverse, the most notable one being Apteropteris burmanicus, a wingless wasp that had grasshopper-like legs that they could use to jump after prey. Speaking of grasshoppers, the Orthoptera were represented by 30 or so species, the most notable of which is Elanchonympha diana, a member of the now extinct Elanidae that had unusual spur-like growths that allowed them to engage in controlled gliding. You also had one member of the Cresmodidae, a family of superficially water strider-like insects that may have been related to grasshoppers or maybe things. We don't really know exactly where they are, so I just figured I'd talk about them now. There was also some really weird stem forms like the unusual Mantoblata nimbrata. Now we come to the last superorder of insects, the Mecopteridae, which are divided into two clades. First of these is Antleophora, which consists of 3 or 2 orders depending on the position of fleas, aka the order Siphonoptera. Luckily, we can avoid that one as none are known from the Burmese Amber. Instead, we have the other two. First is the Diptera, better known as flies, and they are represented by around 248 or so genera, and as such, I couldn't, possibly hope to cover them all. And you got all sorts of gnats, houseflies, some really old mosquitoes, which are the oldest in the fossil record, Burma culex antiquus. But most notable is the unicorn fly, Cassoplura insolitis, which, true to its name, had an unusual unicorn horn-like growth from its head that is considered to be related to modern-day love bugs. The second order, Mecoptera, are better known as scorpion flies for their scorpion-like genitals that males have. Don't worry though, they're completely harmless except for impregnating females. So, 10 are known from the Burmese Amber. The most notable ones include Burmese belta and Huala cachinensis. From there, we finally come to the last and arguably most derived superorder of insects, the Hemipscaterplura. While they might seem alien to you, you are likely familiar with some of them that belong to it. First, there are the Trichoptera, better known as the caddis flies, whose larvae often create casings out of material. A total of 64 species are known from the Burmese amber, of which 2 entirely extinct families are represented, in addition to several living ones. The most notable of these is Burma Psyche. Then there is the order Lepidopterans, better known as butterflies and moths. Despite their modern ubiquity, at the time they were a minor part of the insect fauna, with only 20 species or so, all of which were fairly small, nondescript moths, best represented by Agathophagra. And indeed, they still exist in certain parts nowadays, though they are mostly limited to relics, having been replaced by more derived members of the group. Last but most interesting of this group are the order Pterochoptera. This group is known exclusively from the Burmese amber, but is considered to have diverged from the clade that includes both butterflies and caddisflies in the Upper Triassic, meaning they were already, pretty old by the time of this deposit, with an over 100 million year old ghost lineage. They were relatively uncommon, being only represented by 13 or so species in the formation, and in life would have looked like caddisflies, but with the wing scales of butterflies, and indeed likely lived in small crevices. They show how diverse these lineages were during this time, with a lot of relics that are now long gone. Overall, I hope to have given you a broad, if brief, overview of the diversity found in the Burmese amber. I thought it was necessary to emphasize how big of a contribution this deposit has been, as I feel a lot of other people who talk about it really underplay it, or focus only on the vertebrates, which, while yes, are cool, are far from the majority. And, surely there's no way there could be any significant controversy, right? I mean, people must love Burmese amber, right? Well, you saw the thumbnail. Let's get into it. Alright, so in order to understand this controversy, a bit of historical context is needed, as a lot of people like to pretend that the entire conflict in Myanmar is solely due to this stuff, but the first mention of what we'd call Burmese amber or Burmite dates from the 1st century AD in the text called the Hon Hastru, or in English, History of the Later Han, as the Chinese bought amber from Myanmar, which at the time was ruled by the Third Burmese Empire of the Konghaung dynasty. Later sources written by Europeans, such as the Jesuit priest Alvario Simodo, who was visiting the region at a much later time in 1613, went further into detail on how this amber was gathered. Later in 1885, the British annexed the region, calling it British Burma and importing all their weird practices like bad teeth and crumpets. While there was some minor research done at this stage, notable ones included a study by Theodore Drew Allison Cochrane, a noted American paleontologist who in 1916 established that it was indeed Cretaceous in age as opposed to Miocene, which people had previously considered it to be. Further studies done in 1934 by Dr. H.L. Chihilbrer finally provided more detailed descriptions of Burmese amber occurrences. However, post-independence, which was achieved on January 4th, 1948, when it finally became an independent republic, though some say it actually became independent in 1947, regardless, the region would have undergone a series of communistic and ethnic insurgencies that led it to generally not being a very good place for paleontologists, so research kind of flatlined for a bit. Things would slowly get better over time during a period of what has been described as liberalization under the leadership of such figures as Aung San Suu Kyi from 2011 to 2021. Around this time, in the middle 2010s, there was a massive increase in research going from a few handful of discoveries to over 380 by 2020. Everything was kind of going good until 2020. 2020, and what is likely to be one of the worst years in the 21st century. So many events contributed to what happened next, but to keep this video from being too long and going into stuff like the Central Park birdwatching incident, that I may talk about in a later video at some point, but it's not really relevant to this for the most part, I'll just focus on two. Though it should be said that there was some discussion on this issue prior to this, such as by a news scientist on May 2019, but it was ignored due to being kind of considered a rag by most serious people. First, you had stuff in Myanmar. You see, during 2020 to 2021, there was a military coup, and I mean an actual military coup, not like a riot that people call a coup because it's convenient or useful to win arguments on, like, Twitter. This was, alongside other issues, led to a complete civil war, which is just too complicated to get into, but there are multiple reasons, such as various ethnic groups wanting independence. But most important for this story is the Kachin Independence Army, the KIA, who want the Kachin region of northern Myanmar to secede and become its own country. We'll return to these guys in a bit. But the other and arguably bigger catalyst for the controversy was the publication of the scientific description of Aksenova Davis, which I mentioned earlier, which was on the cover of the March 2020 issue of Nature. Now, this paper, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, was pure dog water for several reasons. The writers of this paper, Linda Zing, Jingnong K. O'Connor, Lars Schmitz, Louis McCope, Ryan C. McKellar, Q Yin, and Gang Lee made numerous errors, including using vague language like bird-like, which is generally frowned upon. But more substantive flaws include how the skull lacks an anterior orbital fenestra, which is a hole in front of the eye socket that is a key trait to archosaurs. The teeth are pleurodontic, i.e. they are attached to the jaw by connective ligaments as opposed to deep sockets of bone seen in archosaurs. This, combined with features of the skull like a brain case with a metallic fissure divided into an ovoid lateral opening, pointed it to being a lepidosaur status that the authors should have easily seen if they were not rushing. This, of course, sloppiness offered a perfect opportunity for the press to spew their spuri of sensationalism, and the New York Times, CNN, Science.com, and heck, even the noted self-proclaimed paleo artist Mark P. Whitten had a blog on it. The media/science coverage of this, of course, led to some YouTubers to cover the subject matter as well. These included Edge Science.
The issue with Myanmar Amber is that the sale of the amber may go to fund the Kachin conflict, which boils down to Kachin insurgents from northern Myanmar fighting government soldiers for independence, with both sides inflicting atrocities against one another.
A noted plagiarist who plagiarism of the poor Mando Spondylus, a figure in the paleo community, was so egregious that it led to the man having a nervous breakdown, ended up breaking up with his girlfriend, and becoming borderline suicidal due to his grandmother passing away at around the same time. In fact, I can tell you for a fact, based on my personal opinion, that Edge Science basically repeated verbatim what the New York Times said about this incident. I guess what they say is true. Once a plagiarist, always one, it seems. Don't worry, Edge. Maybe you'll come up with something original eventually. Other, more notable sources also repeated these positions, like Raptor Chatter.
The military was able to take control of the mine and actually essentially use forced labor to get a lot of the fossils out of that mine. So there's a lot of conflict that's happening with these fossils.
PBS Eons, who made sure to have their most Asian passing presenter do it to give it a little more legitimacy.
This amber has contributed to serious social and political crises in the country. Human rights violations are reported from the mines, and people are being displaced from the mines.
Benji Thomas, and my favorite, the Paleocast, who use a trilobite as their icon. Further reactions by the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology led to study of this deposit effectively being banned. Having watched this and read all these papers, the criticisms of Burmese amber can be broken down into two main categories. Let us start with the smaller of the two. Many have claimed, especially in more text-based coverage of this story, is that due to these specimens being found by untrained non-scientists, their value is extremely limited, and therefore it isn't really valuable. This is simply not true and extremely elitist. The truth is that there has always been a role for amateurs in the field. Many people find fossils without even looking. A notable example is the Maison Creek Formation that I'll put a link for more info down below, but the people of Myanmar's contributions are just as valid as any other. Plus, there's just not enough, fully trained scientists as paleontologists to inspect every fossil site in existence at all times. And dismissing their work is just childish and reeks of ivory tower cathedral thinking. The second argument, however, is a lot more relevant in terms of how, blood amber funds the Civil War or causes it. But is this true? Well, not really. It's a lot more complicated than what many say. I highly recommend you check out the paper titled Comment on Letter of Society of Vertebrate Paleontology dated April 21st, 2020 regarding fossils from conflict zones and reproducibility of fossil-based scientific data, Myanmar Amber. Yeah, it's a bit wordy, but it was signed by 55 noted paleontologists, as they go far more in depth than I possibly can in this video. Firstly, they say that the supply of amber does not only come from one specific mine, and many are worked legally with adults. In fact, according to another paper titled An Alternative Perspective for Acquisitions of Amber from Myanmar, including recommendations of the United Nations Human Rights Council, another long name, found that it seems that Burmese amber has actually decreased in production since the takeover by these militia groups, and amber-containing fossils actually contribute very little, if any, towards funding any group in the area, compared to non-fossil containing amber and other minerals, with two former miners saying that they've had to shut down the mines due to the increased taxes imposed by these groups, leading them to no longer be profitable. Indeed, looking at the evidence presented by these two papers, it seems that most amber is done under non-conflict conditions. Now, I'm not saying these are amazing first world conditions like you'd see in, Germany or the US, but nothing spectacularly or particularly awful in the broader context of third world mineral extraction. Not amazing, there's definitely some valid criticisms to be had there, but this is not solved by banning the study of Burmese amber. If anything, you're just making the situation worse by hurting the miners and local indigenous people who work there, as well as preventing some of the only good they do by just letting it fall into the hands of private members of the Chinese and Southeast Asian community. Because let's be freaking clear here, banning fossil-containing amber does nothing to stop the sale of non-fossil-containing amber, and most of it's just going to get locked up, or worse, ground into some sort of powder that someone will snort because they think it'll cure their hemorrhoids or something. The paper, and myself, would also point out how other sources of amber, like those in the Baltics and eastern Ukraine, are similar in how they exploit these resources very disgustingly. In fact, in Ukraine specifically, there's a number of mafia goons that force people to work them, yet no one in the community of science really seems to care. If I had to speculate, I think it's because they're Eastern Europeans and academia finds it a lot easier to virtue signal about foreign people due to a subcontextual white savior complex that originates from neocolonialism and neo-Orientalism and a sexual fetishization of Asians, as well as the fact that most of these people probably support the invasion of Ukraine because they hate Nazis. They also point out that despite what the SVP and others say, who repeat their talking points like a parrot, they really don't represent the majority of paleontology or paleontologists. Most are located in North America and Europe, and as indicated by their name, most specialize on vertebrates. And as I showed in my previous part of this video, they are a tiny minority of the overall biota found in Burmese Amber. They're beautiful, but nothing really notable for the broader understanding of tetrapod zoology. Let me use an analogy. Let's say you have a rich guy in California who lives in an extremely safe neighborhood and says that we should ban guns to a guy who lives in Alaska and sees a polar bear maul his girlfriend to death. Regardless of the validity of the point, it doesn't really reflect the situation on the ground and just comes off as out of touch. Indeed, the term blood amber itself is an act of cultural vandalism and misappropriation of the term zupo amber from Chinese that means red amber due to its coloration. The anti-Burmese amber hysteria has reached a point where people who post pictures of amber or paleo art of creatures found in Burmese amber get harassed, which is just kind of absurd. Even the speculative evolution community has been infected by this brain rot myth. On July 1st, 2024, Joshua Konopleva, also known as Hukawng, hosted a Spec Evo contest called Lemuria, where it asked the question of what life would be like if Myanmar, Madagascar, and the Indian subcontinent never separated, leading to many endemic forms of life on a island landmass. My brother, who is a much smaller and generally paleo/spec evo nature artist, who has frankly done more art of extinct cephalopods, trilobites, and other fossil invertebrate groups than pretty much anyone else in the scene, decided to contribute, and he made 38 entries, which are, fairly high quality compared to the average entry others did, and in fact it did representatives of groups that had no other representations aside from him, such as fungi and Umenocolidae, that weird group of beetle-like roaches, was, for some reason completely removed from the project. Their reasoning was that he defended Burmese Amber, which, no, he did not. He simply had a different opinion on them and didn't even make entries based off them at all. He just mentioned it in one of the descriptions. Besides, I think the whole notion of excluding taxa from Burmese Amber from a Spec Evo project where the country of Myanmar wouldn't even fucking exist is kind of self-evidently brain dead and stupid or mentally disabled. But the real reason he was banned, though this was the justification, which I said before, stupid, was to get back at him for daring to defend me against completely BS racism allegations originating from a fake screenshot made by that Scamnova fellow, who is a paleotuber who makes pretty mediocre content. Then this was, complicated by Decorex, a bisexual loser paleo artist who also banned him from his own great thriving Spec Evo, all because I, left a comment where I dared have a nuanced take on Forrest Galante, who's a controversial nature documentarian, but, that's a topic for a video next year. In conclusion, let's get back on topic. What can be said about the whole controversy involving Burmese Amber? Well, the Burmese Amber has been a massive treasure trove of knowledge about the smaller fauna of an important period of time during the Mesozoic, when earlier insect and arthropod groups were being supplanted by more modern forms, but were still diverse and had numerous strange stem forms that didn't really go anywhere well. and it shouldn't be dismissed or belittled, and has been the subject of much misinformation based on somewhat good-intentioned liars, thanks to a poorly done paper released in the racial hellhole that was 2020. While there is some criticism to be had in terms of working conditions and that it is valid, it is not single-handedly responsible for funding the conflict in Myanmar, nor is it even a major reason for why that civil war is happening, and to say otherwise is completely historically illiterate about the prior issues facing Myanmar, likely as a result of numerous ethnic contentions as well as British, rule. Now, or does it, justify giving people shit for making paleo art based on creatures in this formation, or taking photos of, Burmese Amber and posting it on Reddit? Or, making Spec Evo stuff inspired by it? Frankly, everyone involved in this should be ashamed of yourselves for promoting such misinformation and just being a bunch of toxic elitist pricks. Anyway, I also would say that you should probably call them out on it, though. What am I going to do? I'm a small YouTuber. No one's going to really listen to me. So hopefully I've given you enough gift of knowledge for you to come to your own decision. I'm the Dark Master. And if you like this video, like it. But if you love it, consider subscribing. I don't do a lot of these one-off nature documentaries often, but I hope to do more in the future, especially once I finish my Kirby video series as well as the Drunken Peasants video series. Merry Christmas. Get your loved one something neat, but don't give them Burmese Amber. It's just too expensive. And have a happy New Year.